Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. This is your host for today, Kate Carter.
I'm Kylie Colwell.
And I'm Holly Spear.
And for this week's story, ladies, this case is a little weird, a little out of normal for what I do as well. I definitely call it bizarre. And unfortunately, I think it's going to leave you guys with more questions than answers, which is very frustrating. We all hate that. It's not okay. But I do have some theories at the very end to go over with. So I want to see what you guys think. This is the mysterious death of Josh Maddux. So Joshua Vernon Maddux was born in March of 1992. He came from a pretty big family and they lived in Woodland Park, Colorado. His parents, Michael and Roberta, were married, lived the normal life, and Josh was the youngest of all his siblings. I think there was 5 of them in total. So Woodland Park, I've never heard of it, and that's because it's a very hidden away town. It's super small, and it's about an hour and a half away from Denver, but it's more in the mountains. So like the Pike National Forest surrounds it completely. The town has about 8,000 people, and it definitely has like this old timey feel. Like the downtown isn't more than 1-story buildings kind of thing. So Josh loved growing up there, though. He was constantly outside. He was a little bit of a hippie. He loved to go for hikes or walks and would often do those daily. And in school, Josh's friends said that he was really kind. He had a great personality and was considered a very sweet human. Outside of school, Josh would normally be found hiking or playing music. He was really into the arts. And his big thing is he would love to like try to play new instruments, which there's always like that one kid that can just pick up an instrument and just start playing it.
Wasn't me.
I feel like there's a lot of kids too that can just pick up any sport and know how to play.
Yeah. I will say Cameron's the type of person that if you were like, hey, Cameron, you want to play tennis today? And he's never played tennis before, he would be able to play, like he's very athletic like that. And then I feel like my family, the guys in my family, if you gave them an instrument, they could probably just be like, and easily do it. Okay, so overall, Josh had a pretty good life and didn't have any issues or run into any trouble. And he had a good life until about 2006 when his older brother, Zachary, committed suicide 2 weeks before his high school graduation. Even though Zachary was known to be depressed, the suicide came as a big shock to the Maddux family and especially Josh. Josh found this really hard, and for the remaining 2 years of his high school experience, people said that Josh was now more quiet, he kept to himself, and he didn't really go out and do activities anymore, which like I can imagine. I read a lot of articles that said Josh and his brother Zachary were really close and just did everything together. Other than that, we're now going to jump to May 8th, 2008. And that's a pretty big date in our story. So Josh, oh, and by the way, I'm going to switch in between Josh and Joshua in the story, and it's the same person. I just sometimes would read articles that would say one, and it would just make me type that. I'll try to say Josh, but Joshua is going to come out a lot too. So May 8th, Joshua is about to graduate in a few weeks. And before heading to school that day, he woke up early and headed out for a morning walk, which was very normal. This wasn't out of the ordinary. And the Maddux family went about their day thinking nothing of it. But then things started to take a turn when Michael Maddux, Josh's dad, returned home from work later that afternoon and found out that Josh had never come back home. He didn't even make it to school. But because Josh was a free spirit and he would go out into the woods alone, the rest of his family remained calm and continued on with their night. The next day, though, there were still no signs of Josh. So the Maddux family began to call around town to Josh's friends to see if they had seen him or if he was with them, but they obviously got no luck. And it wasn't until May 13th, which is 5 days, that the Maddux family decided to call the police and report Josh missing. You know, at first when I see that, and I've had this in some of my stories, the family waits a few days. It's always to me like mind blowing. But in this scenario, Josh often would go on solo camping trips.
It depends on the person too.
Yeah.
Even if you live with that person, there's some people who just don't communicate with their family as much as other families about what they're doing and where they're going.
Yeah. This was one of the families that said Josh often would go out by himself and do this type of thing. And he wasn't really into communicate. Like they would go without hearing from him, but usually they would always know that he was going and doing something.
And how old is he again?
So he's a few weeks away from graduation. So he's probably 17.
Okay, so I mean, he's grown enough
Yeah.
to go do things and stay the night.
Right. And it's a tiny town. Like it's definitely walkable.
Yeah.
But it was the fact that they hadn't heard from him after he left that day that kind of made them worried. At least he would have checked in or something. But as we see a lot, unfortunately, the Woodland Park police chalked it up to Josh just running away from home. He was now about to be 18 years old, so the police said that he was almost legally an adult and he was allowed to do whatever he wanted. The police even told Michael Maddux that they weren't going to list him as a missing persons because he'd most likely just come home someday. He's almost 18, like he can do what he wants. Okay, but he's not 18. You know, like that's still, he's not legal yet. So you should be reporting him as a minor.
And even if he was an adult, like if it's unnatural for him to go missing, and then he's a missing person.
Right.
You would think like the red flags would be raised by the fact that he's missing school.
I went back and looked at it, and May 8th, the day that he went missing, was a Thursday. So he didn't show up Thursday or Friday to school.
Yeah, I skipped a couple Fridays, but
And it's really close to graduation,
true.
which I feel like is kind of a lot of people do that.
Yeah.
So the Maddux family decided to take things into their own hands, and they decided to make posters of Josh. They listed him as a missing persons, and they posted them around town and online. So these posters included pretty specific details about Joshua and his appearance. For example, it listed that Josh's tip of his right index finger was missing. And apparently that had been caused by an accident on a bike that Josh had when he was little. So pretty specific. The poster also said that Josh's brother had died a few years prior and that the boys were really close, which is something I thought would be a little odd to post on a poster. And then the other thing that it said was that Josh could also now be bald, which is another weird thing I thought. And I was thinking like, okay, so the family said this, which makes me think that Josh might have random tendencies to like cut his hair, or like, what does that make you think?
I guess maybe the first thing I would think is maybe they got a tip or a lead that said, oh yeah, that was him, but he was bald. He didn't have his hair. But
Right.
I don't know. Other than that, that's really odd.
I will say if you do look up a picture of him, almost all of the pictures show him with longer hair. So maybe he just grows it out a lot and then we'll always chop it off.
Or maybe they think he is trying to go incognito.
While the Maddux family tried to remain hopeful, Michael was convinced that something bad had happened to Josh. And the family at this point was able to organize a search of the local forest that Josh would often walk in. And neighbors and friends came all over the place to help search for Josh. It was a small town. Like I said, it was like 8,000 people. So really the town kind of rallied about this. Just, I feel like almost everybody knew each other. Think about like how small the high school could have been, you know?
Yeah, they probably know each other very, very well.
But unfortunately, people ended up going to campgrounds. They went to homeless shelters and even called local hospitals, but no one had seen or heard from Josh. And weeks ended up turning into months, which then turned into years. And no one has heard or seen Josh since that morning of May 8th, 2008. In the years following his disappearance, Josh's parents, Michael and Roberta, eventually divorced, with Roberta moving away, but Michael stayed in the family home in Woodland Park. Michael would say that he always chose to stay in this house because he wanted Josh to return home someday, which is like so sad.
It's sad.
Like in a way you would think you'd want to move away because you don't want that memory. But then I also totally understand if I want to stay put just in case.
Yeah, I think that it would be natural for someone to feel like that either way. I think if it was my kid, I would be like, I'm going to stay here in case they ever wander home.
Yeah. Or like, what if they have amnesia and this is the only thing they remember?
Exactly.
So in the Woodland Park town, there was a property that was really well known, and it was called the Thunderhead Ranch. And this actually happened to be not too far from the Maddux home. This property, way back in the day, in the 1930s, 1940s, used to be a really big place for illegal gambling and drinking. This property also had a casino, it had a restaurants, you name it. But at some point in the 50s, the property was discovered running like illegal operations and it ended up getting shut down. Now, funny enough, the owner of this property, his name is Bert. He went on trial for his part, and his lawyer couldn't, which I think is nuts, couldn't really fathom losing the property. And so he went on to buying it from Bert. So the lawyer now owns the Thunderhead Ranch, which got shut down. So it's really just a big old piece of property. So down the road, these new lawyers ended up turning it into a huge ranch, and they put little cabins throughout the property and turned it into like this cute family place. And these small cabins were just a single room, a fireplace, not much, and they'd be rented out to guests. But in 2005, the property was sold to a single home development company. And basically, only one of the original cabins ended up remaining on the property going forward. Everything else was turned into family knit homes, like neighborhoods. And I like to assume that's where the Maddux family is too, because they say in all the articles it's walking distance. So the original owner, Bert's lawyer, Chuck, I didn't say his name before, but his name's Chuck. He would go and visit every once in a while to the cabin just to like make sure it was still there. It wasn't being vandalized, but people weren't using this cabin anymore. And in 2008, he noticed that some of the property inside of the cabin had been ripped out of the wall and placed in front of the fireplace. But honestly, like Chuck didn't think too much of it. He just chalked it up to homeless people, or, you know, maybe it fell down and got moved somehow with the weather. So in 2015, the other homes that were surrounding kept complaining about the cabin. They said it was in horrible condition, and they ended up petitioning to have it torn down. Chuck, the owner, eventually agreed, and he said there was no point in it still being there. Like, no one lived there. It wasn't rented out to people. So in August 2015, construction workers began their process in demolishing the cabin. The workers were to go up to the top of the cabin and demolish it going down. It was going to be the safest way of demolishing it so that it wouldn't damage the property or any of the surrounding houses. So this meant that it starts with the chimney first. When the workers went on top of the cabin, they took out the iron mesh gate that was inside the chimney, which is there to prevent animals from crawling in, and they set it aside. But as soon as the workers began taking apart the chimney, they noticed a really horrific smell. And that's when the workers looked down inside the fireplace in the chimney, and what they saw was a body.
No. That's terrible.
What's creepy about it is the body was actually in a fetal position and it was facing the ground. So in my head, because obviously there's not pictures of it, I think of like if you're doing a cannonball into a pool, that's what the position is, but you're face down in the chimney. So like your head is looking the bottom of the fireplace.
Oh gosh, that's so creepy.
Like I don't even understand how that's like possible. You know, the body's knees were above its head and its hands were covering its face. The body was only wearing a long sleeve t-shirt, and due to the decomposition state of the body, it also was mummified. So obviously the Woodland police were immediately called to the scene and they took the body in for investigations. But that being said, other than doing that, the police did a real shit job of taking evidence from the scene. They ended up allowing the construction workers to demolish the rest of the chimney, and they allowed for the cabin to be torn down.
That's crazy.
You guys find a mummified body and you just destroy everything?
I think it was either same day too, or a few days after the body was found. Like it was pretty much immediately, which is mind blowing to me.
Actually insane.
Yeah.
There's no way they processed that whole scene in one day.
No. And this is 2015, you know, like it's kind of recent, you know, and so you assume technology is up to the days, so are the standards, and they didn't.
Well, and it's not like they found a skeleton. They found a actual body, you know, like a skeleton, you may be like, oh, it may be some old owner of this 100-year-old property, but you found a body. It's not that old, you know?
And in a weird place, in a weird position. It's not like the body was just laying in the cabin. Even if it was, that's still weird. You process the scene. We're going to talk about this in a little bit too. So On September 29th, 2015, about a month after the body was found, it was publicly announced that the body was in fact that of Joshua Maddux. The Maddux family was unfortunately finally able to get closure on Joshua's whereabouts and ended up having a service for him at the end of October in 2015.
But it ends with a Southern Colorado family finally getting closure. The remains of a teenager missing for the last 7 years have been found.
Joshua Maddux was 18 when he vanished in May of 2008. His remains were found in a cabin chimney that was torn down last month. The cabin was empty, and his family thinks he was looking for a place to hang out. His family tells KRDO News Channel 13's Emily Allen they've been holding out hope he would come home. But at least now they finally know what happened.
It's not what we wanted, obviously. We wanted him to come home, but at least now we can stop looking.
For 7 years, Joshua Maddux's family was left wondering.
All these mixed feelings, because we did hold out a lot of hope.
His sister Ruth says Josh left one day and never said why. He was newly 18, and Ruth figured he wanted some space. But days turned into years.
It's a nightmare. I mean, it's horrible. It's so hard to deal with every day.
His remains were found in the chimney of an old cabin in Woodland Park. It was workers here at this construction site that were finally able to give the Maddux family the answer they've been searching for 7 years.
It's good to have closure now because we're not going to just keep looking for him because that's been really tough.
Now his niece gets to know him through his old journals and Ruth's stories.
Actually, probably one of the nicest people I've ever met. Probably that I'll ever meet.
He seemed like that person that just didn't seem to really exist, like too great to be real.
And after these long, painful years, Ruth says this news brings at least a little peace.
It's super sad.
Gosh, that's so sad. I mean, the first thing that I notice is that they're quickly saying he was looking for a place to hang out, and seems like they're not saying any foul play is involved.
Oh, just you wait. So if you remember what I said before the video, the construction crew was given the okay by the police to continue in their demolition of the cabin. And that came within only a few days of Joshua's body being found in the chimney. The man who found Joshua's body, Chuck, later states that he would not have allowed the cabin to have been torn down if he had been aware at the time how disorganized the police department was surrounding Josh's death. I mean, the police basically immediately said that Josh's death was an accident, and they never considered the fact that it could have been foul play.
It's not on the people that found him or even the people that demolished it.
Right.
It's on the police.
And I will say there are tons of things out there that are pissed at the construction workers for tearing down the cabin and the evidence. Also, the construction people thought the police had done their job, like it's
Yeah.
not like they were doing it.
Exactly. Even if they tell you, hey, you guys need to tear this down, which they probably didn't, they just let the construction workers do it. That's on the police. That's their responsibility to say,
Right.
hey, no one touch this, no one go in here. I mean, that's just like the very first step in an investigation is keeping the crime scene or the potential crime scene completely untouched.
Well, and something else that really frustrates me with this and all cases is the way I look at it. When there is a dead body, you should always assume it's foul play until you find out it's not foul play. You can collect evidence and then you rule it out that it's an accident. Because in this case, them stating right away that no foul play was involved, police could not collect evidence. They did no forensic testing. They immediately let the cabin be torn down.
It's almost like the opposite of in a courtroom, innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
Guilty until proven innocent. Prove this is not a crime scene if there's a dead body that's died in a suspicious way.
No, they don't even have anything at this point to rule out foul play. No needles, like no drugs around. Like it's not like an obvious
Right.
overdose. It's not a car accident.
Yeah.
I don't know why they would immediately think that. So at some point during the little investigation that they did on this case, the districts ended up changing, and it went from the Woodland Park Police Department having the control to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. And that being said, you would think the Colorado Bureau of Investigation would do a better job, but it really doesn't seem like they did. That being said as well, both departments actually used the same person as their coroner. which I also find odd. And this coroner's name is Al Bourne, A.L. Bourne. So he's going to come up a lot in this case. So I'm going to call him Bourne for this reason. Bourne pretty much stated immediately that he was ruling out homicide in Joshua's case and said that Josh most likely suffered from an accidental death. According to Bourne, he believes that Joshua climbed onto the cabin's roof, got on top of the chimney, and decided to shimmy down the chimney head first as if, quote, he was Santa Claus, end quote. Done pissed me off. Why would you even say that? I feel like that's so disrespectful.
Yeah, it's rather distasteful for sure.
Bourne said that Josh only got stuck in the chimney after he most likely hit the heat elator insert at the bottom of the chimney and wasn't able to get out. So this heat elator, I obviously had not heard of that word before, didn't even know it had a name, but what I can think of, my family home back in North Carolina, when you are at the fireplace and you're about to start a fire, you have to pull on this metal lever that like opens up a metal gate in the fireplace, and that lets the heat rise up. But when you're not using the fire, you close it and it keeps the outside from coming in. So I assume that's the heat elator that they're talking about.
That to keep animals out and like brush and just random stuff out from just like falling straight into your chimney?
Kind of, but so I know it's for, you open it to allow the heat to go up and then you close it to not have like the temperature come in, I assume, because to not allow animals is there, on top of chimneys, there's actually like an insert. It's a metal iron mesh gate thing on top of chimneys. And that's so that animals can't get in.
Okay. And I'm guessing this one didn't have the metal mesh at the top because
It did.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
I'm sure you'll get there because
Yep.
that seems like a.
I did say it. I did already say it, but it's okay if you didn't catch it because it was kind of not a big deal. But when the construction workers went on top of the chimney for the first time, they took off the mesh iron gate and then they saw the body.
Okay, this changes everything. Go ahead.
So it was there. We're going to talk about that. So the coroner went on to say that he thought Josh died of hypothermia the same day that he got stuck in the chimney. And that's because the local weather dropped to about 20 degrees that night. When Bourne spoke to the Maddux family about Josh's death, he told them that he was sorry for what had happened, but that it most likely had been a, quote, horrible death for Josh, end quote, which is like another shit thing to say to somebody. But remember Chuck, the guy that found Josh's body? When he found out that the coroner and the police said that Josh's death was accidental, Chuck was pissed. Neither the coroner or the police stated that Josh's clothes were actually found at the bottom of the chimney. And when they found the construction workers, when they found Josh's clothes before the cabin got destroyed, the clothes were actually folded in a pile.
No way.
Which makes no sense. And then the coroner nor the police talked about the metal iron mesh insert that was at the top of the chimney. And that basically would have made it impossible for Joshua or anyone or any animals to get inside of the chimney. So obviously Chuck, like basically right from the beginning, is believing that this whole thing wasn't an accidental death.
Common just logic says that something else has happened.
I just looked it up because I remembered this fun fact. In some states, coroners are elected instead of appointed. Also, in some states, coroners do not require a medical degree or any type of training.
Well, that's fun. So just anybody can just go be a coroner.
Oh, so I did look it up. In Colorado, they are elected, but they do require a medical degree.
Okay. Any state that doesn't require a coroner to have a medical degree does not make sense. How does that make any sense?
Indiana, the coroner is only required to attend a basic 40-hour medicological death investigation course.
That's 1 week. 1 week of work.
1 work week of information and education.
Damn, we could do that.
Yeah, you guys want to be coroners? You can.
100%.
I'm down.
I would totally do it. Okay. So this whole accidental death ruling that the police and the coroner said came out within the same week that Josh's body was found. So really quickly. And it was immediately released to the public after they said it was Josh's. They also said it was accidental. And right away, this was nuts. Right away, people started calling in tips to the police stating that a specific man had been going around town telling people that he had killed Josh. Multiple people came with the same person's name, said the same story. But like we hear in a lot of our stories, what did the police do?
No.
Nothing. They ignored the tips and they didn't follow up with any of them.
The case is closed, Kate. It was an accident.
But that's not like, even if the case is closed and you hear this, wouldn't you be like, maybe we should go get a second opinion about the accidental death ruling? Like, that is, I don't know.
Yeah, you have that many people saying the same thing. You
Right.
need to look into it.
I mean, the tips coming in, the facts about the iron mesh gate, the folded clothes, it's not really screaming the way that Josh's body was in the chimney. It's not really screaming accidental death to me.
Not at all.
No. So for the mesh gate part, they can be removed from chimneys and then placed back in. I mean, that's actually how they clean the chimneys. You have to take it out and then you put it back in. And it stops animals from climbing in. So let's just say for some reason, Joshua did decide to climb into the chimney that day. He would have had to have removed this gate, gone in the chimney, but then how did the gate get placed back on top? I mean, if you think about it, Josh's body was facing down into the chimney and his hands were on his face. So they weren't behind, like there's no.
It's impossible.
Yeah. And then the whole fact that Josh's clothes were found folded at the bottom of the chimney makes no sense either. And like, why was this information not taken into consideration by the police? I just feel like those two things, plus the tips, it should have raised major flags to the police, but it didn't. And that's truly because, and I'll talk about it in a little bit too, the accidental death ruling by the coroner really effed things up for the whole investigation.
The fact that his clothes were found inside, even if it was a complete accident, which I don't think is possible, he was in the cabin, took his clothes off, folded them, and then went outside and went down the chimney to be Santa Claus. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. In potentially 20-degree weather. So later on October 3rd, 2015, Chuck and Bourne, the coroner, decided to meet in person to discuss their findings. Chuck continued to tell the coroner that his theories didn't make any sense. There was like a lot of reasons for it, but one of them was also being the way that the chimney was constructed. Now, remember, Chuck is in construction. He owns this business. He's been doing it forever. So he knows what he's talking about. And the two of them debated back and forth for hours, and they finally came to a conclusion that neither of them were going to be able to convince each other on one way or the other, like which one was right. So instead of trying to figure out who was right between them, they decided to both go to the media to talk about the case. And that's when the media first heard a lot of details about Joshua's case, because the police never released any of it. They just said it was accidental and moved on. Which also, just to throw this in there too, to say a death is an accidental death ruling in the same week that you find the body is nuts. Like, that does not happen. That is a scam.
Even if you process the crime scene and manage to do an autopsy in a week, that means you didn't talk to anybody.
No, not at all. They didn't. And his body was decomposed and partially mummified. I mean, it doesn't make any sense that they went about doing all of this the way that they did, but we can't do anything about it now. So Chuck went to talk to the media first, and he told him about the mesh gate at the top of the chimney and how Joshua wouldn't have been able to climb down the chimney just due to that fact. He also told them about the folded clothes. And then Chuck also said that there was a huge piece of furniture, because if you remember from the beginning of the story, there was a huge piece of furniture inside the cabin that had been ripped off the walls, and it was placed in front of the chimney. So it basically covered up, or placed in front of the fireplace, excuse me. So it basically covered up the entire opening of the fireplace. So even if Josh had gone up into the chimney instead of down, How did he get that piece of furniture in front of the fireplace? There's too many weird things happening. Like, I don't understand.
There's too many just completely impossible things
Yeah.
in this story.
And then you also have to remember too, like Chuck, he plays no part in this. He really has no reason to like spread any lies or go against the police. He just happened to be the person that found Joshua's body that day. He wasn't a family member, you know, he wasn't a friend. He just wanted the actual truth to come out about Joshua's body because he knew for a fact this wasn't going to be an accidental death.
How are the family taking the coroner's report that it was an accident? What are their thoughts on it?
I don't really go into it much because I'll say it at the end. They kept quiet the whole time. They, to this day, have been very quiet about all of it. They basically just said, it is what it is. We're just happy we have his body, which is kind of sad because, you know, we obviously looking at it from a different point of view, you always want to have the answer. And if somebody killed him or if something else happened, you'd want to know. But to them, they kind of were just more of sitting there and listening.
It may also be that it's easier for them to accept that, you know, something tragic just happened to him and not have to think about someone doing something terrible to him.
Right.
I think as a family member, it'd probably be even harder to know that your loved one had been killed.
And you got to remember too, it was 7 years in between Josh being missing and his body being found. So
oh yeah.
Yeah, that entire time they were like, is he dead? Is he across the country? Is he, you know, like in the woods somewhere? Like they had no idea. So I think it was just closure enough for them that his body was found.
Yeah, the torture of wondering is over for them. So
yeah. Now, when it came to the coroner, Bourne, talking to the media about his findings, he stated that him and the investigators in Joshua's case did not know anything about this iron mesh gate that was on top of the chimney. In fact, Al stated that he never saw the gate and neither did the police, which is actually true because they were the ones that told the construction workers to demolish the cabin. So they would have never have seen it to begin with. Like they didn't do any evidence checking, you know?
Yeah.
In fact, Bourne went on to say that if this chimney mesh gate did exist, it had probably been removed years ago, or that it was actually never in the chimney like Chuck said. So he just thought everybody's lying. And then when it came to Josh's clothes being found on the ground of the cabin, Al stated the following, quote, "This part puzzles us. We found his clothes just outside the fire pit. He only had on a thermal t-shirts, so we don't know why he took his clothes off, took his shoes and socks off, or why he went outside, climbed on the roof, and went down the chimney. Joshua must not have been thinking right. This is a real puzzle." End quote.
Yeah, very puzzling.
Isn't that your job? To figure out the puzzle?
To be puzzled?
Yeah, like what? That makes no sense. On top of all of this part really pisses me off too. The coroner went on to state that he truly believed drugs were to blame in Joshua's death. He thought that maybe Josh had done all of this, you know, gone outside naked, gone down a chimney because Josh had been on drugs and he wasn't in the right mental state. But because Josh's body was such in bad decomposition when it was found, and because his death was ruled an accident, his body was basically immediately cremated. So there was no way that his body could have been tested for drug use or for them to see if there had been any drugs in his system. But to this day, the Maddux family does state, and they swear by it, that Josh never did drugs. Like that was not his cup of tea.
Yeah, that's just a lazy answer. And that says, I don't want to do my job. It must be drugs.
And how shit is that to say that? Well, first of all, it's the coroner saying that too, who ruled it an accidental death. And now he's coming back and he's like, oh, Josh was I believe he was on drugs.
Yeah, that's pretty shit. I hate that, actually.
It's just frustrating. So when the coroner went on to explain why he didn't think Joshua had been killed and then placed into the chimney, he stated, this whole thing's frustrating. He stated that he was unable to find any marks or trauma on Joshua's decomposed body, which he also originally stated was too badly decomposed to tell anything, and that he didn't find any signs of strangulation on Josh's neck. Therefore, he was not murdered and his death had to have been accidental.
Oh, so you can't find evidence of that, so you're not going to take it into consideration. But you also can't find evidence that he did drugs, but you're
Yeah.
definitely going to say that that's what happened.
Like
Okay.
he said, Josh wasn't strangled, so it's accidental.
No, like, have we considered the possibility that someone shoved him into the chimney and he just died a slow, painful death? Hence why there's no track marks or strangulation marks? Maybe?
But also, Kylie, his body was so badly decomposed, they said they couldn't tell anything anyways. So like he's just coming up with bullshit, you know? He could have easily have been killed and placed into the chimney and they still wouldn't have known. So instead of writing on Joshua's coroner report that he was unable to tell the cause of death, he instead wrote that it was accidental, which then stops police from being able to do any further investigations because it closes the case. So that's the whole issue, is that if Al didn't know how Joshua died, he should have said he was unable to tell the cause of death. Like by saying it was accidental, the police couldn't even investigate, even if they wanted to. It doesn't seem like they did, but it made the case closed, you know?
There's no shame in just saying undetermined.
Absolutely.
Keep it open.
Yeah.
And not even to mention, before Josh's body was even examined by the coroner, the cabin had been torn down on behalf of the police's like requests. So really, this is just a shit show happening. Like nobody was going to help. They basically from day one was like, this is accidental. Let's get rid of it all, you know?
There are so many cases where the family has to go back and beg for the cause of death to be changed from accidental or suicide or something like that, so that investigations can even start.
Right. So let's get back on track for a second. After Joshua's death, tips began to flood the Woodland Parks Police Department that people thought a specific person had killed Josh. Of course, those tips were never followed up on, but that person that people were suspicious of was actually Josh's friend, a guy named Andrew Newman. So Andrew was a high school friend of Joshua's. Andrew happened to be about 2 years older, and they had met in band class and became very close. Post-graduation, Andrew was a very like transient dude. He often would like hop trains across the country. He lived this very nomadic lifestyle. And that's something that Josh thought was like totally cool. Because you got to remember, like Josh was a little hippie. He liked to be in the woods, stuff like that. So the idea of just going wherever you want to was up his alley. So the two friends actually had planned to go on a trip together once Josh had graduated from high school, and they were going to go to New Mexico and they were going to get their hopping train. So like everybody knew this. It was going to be like a fun adventure for Joshua, his big first adventure kind of thing. But after Josh went missing, Andrew was seen in New Mexico shortly after, but obviously Josh was not with him and wouldn't be found for the next 7 years. So let's get into Andrew Newman a little bit. This dude, unlike Joshua, had a lot of problems with the law. And one of them being right after Joshua's death, Andrew ended up in prison for possibly killing 2 people in Texas. On top of that, also had multiple burglary warrants issued against him out of New Mexico, out of Seattle, out of Portland. This dude got around on his little trains, committed some crimes, and peaced out. He was known by the law. And after Josh's death, people called the police department in Woodland and said they had last seen Joshua and Andrew together on the day that Josh disappeared. And that at some point after Josh went missing, Andrew began to brag to people that he killed Joshua, which is a weird thing to do to your best friend. That's kind of red flags all over the place.
Kind of. That's, yeah.
Do we know how these 2 people that were killed by him allegedly were killed?
We're going to get into some stuff.
Okay.
And that was right after Joshua's death. But the police did nothing with this information. And Andrew was already in prison. So the Woodland police said that they didn't want to add any more to their plate since the case was now considered closed.
Okay. I'm going to start using that at my job. I'm just going to be like, you know what? I just really don't want to put anything else on my plate right now.
Yeah.
I just got a lot.
I got a lot going on. Yeah. Case is closed. Okay. So after Josh's body was found, which was 7 years after he went missing, the media really ended up playing on the fact that people thought Andrew was responsible for his death. But the police and the coroner, Al Bourne, would be found saying that this information was just hearsay and that none of these people ever came forward with evidence or timestamps. Which, like, come on, man. It had been 7 years and you want me to tell you, you want me to give you a picture or say it was at 12:03 p.m.? Like,
you're a coroner. What do you know about hearsay?
I don't know. This Al Bourne dude thinks he's president, but think about it. They're saying that these people that said the tips 7 years prior never came forward after Josh's body was found with actual evidence. Well, that's not their job.
No, and like if I submit a tip 7, 8 years ago, I assume either it was looked into it or they just discarded it. It's not my job to follow up on whether you followed up on my tip.
Not at all. But there is a part of this case that's a little interesting. A few months after the death was officially closed by the police and it was considered accidental, an anonymous user on Reddit, Kylie's favorite platform, posted a very long description on why they thought Andrew Newman was the person that killed Josh. This user posted on a thread that was already up, and that thread was called, quote, "People who have known murderers, serial killers, etc. How did you react when you found out? How did it affect your life afterwards?" End quote. And this thread was from 9 years ago, which would have been 2015. So right when Josh's body was found and they said it was accidental. So anonymous user, we don't know who it is. I'm going to read you all this post. Now I need you guys to stick with me for this because it's a lot of information and it's mostly going to be talking about Andrew Newman. Quote, "I went to high school with this skinny, dorky, hippie kid named Andy who played guitar in a band. I was never good friends with him or anything, but a year or so after I graduated, one of my close friends, Joshua, started hanging out with him, and then Josh went missing. Last I heard, Andy was telling people that, quote, yeah, me and Josh have been spending a lot of time together and we're planning a trip to New Mexico, end quote. And that's when Andy had told a lot of people about this trip right before Josh disappeared. This wasn't out of the ordinary, though. I mean, Andy often hopped trains to other states before coming home to Woodland Park. And Josh had always told his family how much he wanted to go on a big adventure. Andy had been to New Mexico before, and Josh thought he would be a good guide. A year after Josh's disappearance, Andy actually got into some legal trouble in New Mexico. And it turns out, in addition to becoming a lot scarier looking, Andy had also headed down to New Mexico where he found himself shooting the shit with a caretaker of a disabled guy. Andy got invited over to their apartment and befriended a man named James Wilto. James lived in Albuquerque and he cared for a man named Anthony Schneider. Anthony was disabled and lived with James. So James and Andy became drinking buddies. And when Andy was in town, James let him crash on the couch in their apartment. On May 2nd, 2009, almost a year after Josh's disappearance, Andy was drinking with James and Anthony in their apartment when James got up to go to the bathroom. While James was in the bathroom, Andy grabbed a knife and stabbed Anthony Schneider to death. He then fled the apartment. A few weeks later, Andy was seen walking around Houston, Texas, and was stopped by police after attempting to hitchhike, but the cops just let him off without a warning. A few days later, Andy was still in Houston, going house to house, asking people for water. It's most likely that Andy hadn't eaten or drank in a few days because he had no money. Eventually, 2 teenagers let them into his house and they called their parents. When the parents arrived, Andy told them that he was just trying to get out of town. So the dad said he'd drive him to the next town over, but in reality, the dad drove Andy to a police station. At the police station, the cops took Andy's fingerprints, which then linked him to a warrant in Seattle for burglary, and also for the stabbing of Anthony Schneider in New Mexico. Andy pleaded not guilty in court and also tried to escape from jail a few days later, which of course added more charges to what he was already on. So on May 6, 2010, Andy was sent to New Mexico Mental Health Institute, where he then confessed to also murdering a woman in New Mexico. He murdered this woman right after Josh's body went missing, and stuffed this woman in a barrel. But even though Andy had confessed to killing this woman, the police didn't do anything about it since Andy was already on trial for murder. In May 2011, James Wilto, the caretaker from back in New Mexico, was actually killed during a bar fight. And shortly after, the prosecution dropped their case against Andy because they said their sole witness was now dead and there was no evidence that Andy had killed Anthony. So Andy was released from prison. End quote. So that's part of the Reddit. It keeps going on, but that's part of the Reddit's anonymous post.
Pretty juicy and pretty damning.
Very detailed.
So it's important to note too that like when Andy had been released from prison and those tips were flooding in to the Woodland Park police about Andy, Joshua's body had not been found yet. He had just gone missing. So people were convinced that Andy had something to do with his disappearance. And at some point, there had been over 3 police stations that had received tips saying the exact same thing, that Andy was telling people he had killed Joshua. Now, this Reddit post ended by saying the following, quote, "It's not that I want somebody to blame for Joshua's death, but give me some answers. All I'm saying is I wish the police would have done their job. Open an investigation, try to track down some leads, interview at least some of the people who called in tips for the 7 years that Joshua was missing. I don't know. Don't just say it's accidental and dust your hands and call it a day." So obviously this Reddit person knew a lot of information. Seems like they knew Joshua and that they knew Andy as well. And they gave a lot of information that wasn't also out there. It's nice that that was posted. A lot of people freaked out once this Reddit post went viral. Moving on, at some point, the Woodland Park locals ended up really pressuring the coroner, Al Burke, to look into Andrew Newman as a suspect, which, like, how sad is that? They have to go to the coroner and not the police. But Al responded with, quote, "I know it's not a natural death, but I'm confident it's not suicide. My other options are accidental death, homicide, and undetermined cause of death. It's so frustrating we can't pin it down," end quote. Like, what the hell was that? He literally just said, "I'm confident it's not a suicide, but I know it's not a natural death." So then why would you say it's accidental?
Yeah, and you can't pinpoint any of them. So, okay, let's go with the option that allows us to investigate further, undetermined.
No, they're going to go with the option that saves them time and the lazy option.
So no investigation took place, so we'll never have any answers. The only way that the cops could reopen Josh's case is if the coroner went back and stated that the death was in fact not accidental. To this day, it's October of 2024, Andrew Newman has never been considered an actual suspect in the death of Joshua Maddux. In fact, Andy has been having a lot of fun these past few years. In 2017, he was arrested in New Jersey on contempt charges. In 2018, he was arrested in Texas for skipping town after a warrant was served to him in Florida. And then while in prison in Texas in 2019, Andy assaulted 3 police officers. Now, I will say, Kylie, maybe you can do some digging. I haven't been able to figure out if Andy is still in prison, and I can't really figure out where he is. So when you look him up, or when I looked him up, it says that his main address is still listed as Woodland Park, Colorado. As for the coroner, Al Bourne, he eventually decided that being a coroner wasn't that fun and it wasn't for him. So he decided to go work for a deputy in the county over from Woodland Park. Chuck Murphy, the man who found Josh's body, he's now 88 years old, and he still runs the exact same construction company that he did back in the day when Josh went missing and when they found his body. But they're now located in Colorado Springs. And to this day, Chuck still believes that there was, in fact, foul play in Joshua's death and maintains that it was not accidental. As for the Maddux family, they've kept really quiet since Josh's body was found. Joshua's case was pretty much immediately closed. There was no further investigation. And so his family just had to make peace with the outcome that they never wanted. They always had hoped that Josh had just gone away on some great adventure like he planned, and it never really crossed their minds that his body was just down the street from them. I want to get over some of the conspiracy theories and see what you guys think. So Joshua entered the cabin, took off his clothes, went outside, climbed the cabin, went down the chimney, and got stuck.
No.
Next.
My main thing for, I guess, ruling that out is the metal grate on top of the chimney.
Mm-hmm. Well, another theory kind of following the same direction is that Andy actually forced Joshua to take drugs that day, and the drugs were potentially PCP. And I say that because at some point after Joshua's disappearance, Andy had been arrested in possession with PCP. And for people that don't know what that is, it's also called angel dust. It basically is a drug that like makes you hallucinate really badly, makes you hear things, and it often makes people really violent.
Okay, like yeah, if they're both high, I don't know, just in their high state. Joshua climbs down the chimney, but for some reason Andrew puts the metal grate back on and then leaves. I think that's like the most innocent option. I mean, other than like forcing him down there or murdering him beforehand and shoving him in there.
So another theory is that on the day that Josh went missing, he went to the cabin by himself and at some point started to get hypothermia while he was there. And in his hypothermia era, he ended up having something called paradoxal undressing. So paradoxal undressing is when someone is at the end stages of hypothermia and they believe that they're actually really hot instead of cold. And so these type of people, which you'll see like people climbing snow mountains and it's like a naked body, it's because they had paradoxal undressing at the end of their hypothermia where they take off all their clothes because they think they're burning up. They think they're sweating. And people said with the paradoxal undressing, he also could have suffered from terminal burrowing at the same time. So terminal burrowing is what happens when a person is suffering from hypothermia and feels the need to burrow themselves into a small space to keep warm. So these people think that Josh went through all these stages of hypothermia, and that's how he ended up basically naked in the chimney.
Again, I just keep coming back to the metal mesh on top. Let's say that he did get hypothermia, which does sound like pretty plausible out in that wilderness that he was in. And I have heard of instances of people taking their clothes off, like you just described. I think there was a case where there was some hikers on a mountain. It was like a big unsolved mystery. And they thought that it was possible that they took their clothes off and wandered out into the wilderness. They were delusional, hypothermic, right. Yada, yada. You could convince me of that here. But if he does let's say he takes his clothes off and he folds them, he's delirious. He goes outside, he climbs on top of the roof, and he forces himself into the chimney and he dies. How does the metal mesh get on there? Also, how does he, I don't know how tall this building is, but how does he climb up there without anything? Right. Was there no ladder? Was there right. Like, how does he do, like, how does he do this? There.
People also said like he could have entered from the fireplace, but there was a huge, like, they never really said what it is, but it was a massive piece of furniture blocking the fireplace. And from what I read, it was not one person could move it kind of thing.
And head first, you said that he was upside down, head first.
He would have had to jump. He would have had to jump in a cannonball situation. It would have made no sense. But also another thing too with it, because some people believe the hypothermia story, which seems more reasonable than like some of the other ones. But an issue with that I see as well, if he had started to get cold, like, because you get cold way before hypothermia starts, he was walking distance from his house. It was down the street. It just doesn't make sense that he would stay there freezing his ass off and then get to the hypothermia stage and have all of those things happen.
And then also, if he was the one to move the whatever big piece of furniture in front of the fireplace to, like, I don't know, maybe block a giraffe that may be coming in through it, and then he got to this burrowing state and decided to get in to the chimney or into the fireplace, wouldn't you move the furniture back and then go in from the bottom?
Right.
To me, there's the fireplace, and there's two things that restrict you from getting into either side of it that he couldn't have done once he's in the fireplace. I just don't think there's any way that I can believe that it's anything other than foul play.
Also, I just want to point this out, not to make it like graphic or anything, but the way that his body was found with his knees above his head and his arms on his face facing downwards, that is not a position you could get into a chimney in, being awake and alive, and at least what I think. Like, I'm thinking of my family's home or our fireplace and chimney that was in Arkansas. You cannot I don't even think if I was just jumping in as Santa Claus would I even fit down the chimney. You know, like, it's a weird position for someone to say that that was natural.
And if I was trying to get into the house through the chimney, which we know didn't happen because his clothes are already in there, he's already gotten into the house.
Right.
If I was going to go through the chimney, I would go not head first. I can tell you that.
No, absolutely not.
No, it seems like he graphically was folded in half and dropped in.
Yeah.
And I hate to say this too, but imagine you're stuffing a body through the chimney. I think I'd go head first.
Absolutely.
Not foot first.
So
I don't think that the same thing happened with this case. I think that this one is much different, but I am thinking about the case of the high school student that was found
in the
gym mat.
Kendrick Johnson.
And at the end of the day, these are all just theories, and there's a good chance we're never going to actually really get an answer on how Joshua Maddux died. Was it murder? Was it accidental? There's not really one particular theory that sticks out for me. It's just too weird to be a coincidence at this point. But what we do know is that there's always a potential for more evidence to be found if the police had correctly staged the scene for evidence. If the police had not forced the cabin to be demolished right after Joshua's body was found, and if the coroner had not stated immediately that Joshua's death was accidental and stated that it had been an undetermined death instead, there would have been at least maybe a few more answers found. And ladies, that is the case of Joshua Maddux. And with that, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. If you want even more information, including photos of the case, you can check us out on our blog at overmydeadpod.com. Be sure to leave us a review wherever you're listening to this, and check us out on social media at Over My Dead Pod. And we will see you next week with another case. Bye.
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 Just jumping right into overtime. My aunt, Chuchella, shout out Chuchella. She's a very avid listener, and almost every week will text me as soon as the case comes out because she listens to it on the way to work. And she texted me the other day and she goes, you know, when you guys say bye, I also verbally out loud say bye. And I was like, you're just hanging out with the girls, Chuchella. That's what you're doing. You're just listening to us and saying bye with us at the end.
But
bye, Chuchella.
Bye, Chuchella. Bye. That's adorable.
So before we go any further, Kylie is actually at my home right now. She is upstairs recording in the nursery. And that is because we have a Category 5 hurricane coming to Florida this week, tomorrow, in fact, at this time. And Kylie had to evacuate.
I did. I snuck in.
Anywho, so everybody pray for Kylie and her house. What we really need to worry about is getting her dad out of the house, but it doesn't really seem like he's going to do it.
No, I texted him while we were recording, and he said he was busy watching Kamala Harris's interview on Howard Stern.
Oh,
I will go down with this ship. I'll put my hands up. He's going down with this house. Huh?
He did just buy the house, so I feel like he's a little attached to it. It's like his dream house, so it's like his little baby. He cares about it more than me. Thoughts and prayers to my dad.
If you guys were president, what would your first act be as president?
I have a list. I think when it's one lane going in each direction and like a four-way stop or four-way intersection, you should be able to turn left on red. Number one. Number two, stadiums and like arenas that have like a clear bag policy. And they also have a size limit policy on how big the clear bag is. It's one or the other. You got to pick one. If it's clear, it's clear.
It's clear. You can see all of it. Oh, Cameron said he would get rid of daylight savings.
Ooh, agreed. Websites that still have posts for things for sale that are out of stock and have no plans on restocking within 48 hours should be taken down by the FBI.
Not the website itself, but the FBI. Okay.
The whole website needs to be taken down.
Yeah, you get one chance too.
And then Jeff Bezos, every time I put something into cart and it says Prime 1 day delivery or same day delivery, and then I go check out and it says it's going to be 2 to 4 days, 30 days in jail.
Yep.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And then last thing I have is that apps on your phone cannot be more than 99 cents. No, if I go and find an app and I find out that it's going to cost me money, I'm not getting it.
Well, one thing that I would do, I think the first thing that I would do would be to make a separate interstate for big trucks.
That's a good one.
I support that.
get your
Yeah, big
own-
trucks get their own way.
I think I actually saw this on a TikTok that made me think of this was Elon Musk straight into space. Straight into space. Fling him.
Just has to do his own
Well,
thing.
he wants to go to space anyways.
He is like a little alien. I think he belongs there.
He's
I
got to
think
test out his own stuff.
I think he could do, yeah, he has to test out his own stuff. I think he could maybe establish like a colony on Mars, and that might be a good thing.
Hey, Cameron's always wanted to go to space too. We could send him with Elon Musk. You'd love
Right.
that, wouldn't you?
If it was like all paid for, would you go to space?
No,
I think we have talked about it.
Okay.
I'm not going to space. Cameron, you wouldn't have to pay him. He would just go if he given the opportunity. He would 100% go to space.
Okay, I'll go with Cam.
Anywho, toodles.
bye.
Bye.
Bye.